Concrete Flowers, Chapter 1, Basant. It's the height of spring in 1980s Lahore, the perfect time for Basant, a festival celebrating the return of warmer weather with longer days and much shorter nights, which meant more time to be able to do more during the day. It also meant more time for planning for later on in the night. The other ladies of the house are busy in the Haveli, seeing to the cooks in the kitchen, making sure they're making tonight's menu correctly. They're all dressed up in their most exquisitely adorned, brightly coloured clothes. My Appa, eldest sister, dressed in her blue and silver sharara, a heavily embellished dupatta cast over her shoulders, allowing the rest of the drapery to fall over her torso, ensuring the gorgeously detailed embroidery was visible to anyone who saw her, was essentially the head of our household. Ever since my Ummi passed away when I was very little, and since my Abir was never quite the same since his accident, she took over looking after us in our house. That was whenever she used to visit, of course. She is over 20 years older than I am, so I've only ever seen her married and visiting us thereafter. She was very different from the way Ummi ran the house, although she still tried to keep things the way that they were. Ummi was the quintessential lady of the house. I always thought she was very forward-thinking for her time, bearing in mind she grew up in 1940s in what was then India, but now was Pakistan. Ummi had some harrowing stories from the partition, things that a little girl, of which she was at the time, should never have to see. Ummi had lost countless friends and family and often spoke of how it never made any sense how people who had been close friends for generations, over one night had developed a hatred for each other, that they had reduced themselves to the violent monsters they had shown themselves to be. Ummi would often make sure our Hindu, Sikh and Christian neighbours were the first to receive a newly cooked meal that was being especially made for any event, be it the seasonal change, Eid, Ramadan, Christmas, Diwali, Lohri and the like. We used to go to their Havelis and they used to come to ours. We had even attended a wedding at a church. The one time I remember rushing to see the bride and sitting by her side before she was ready to go to the church for the ceremony. We had been invited by Malcolm and his mum Julie. Malcolm's new wife was called Mary, and I recall her beautiful white dress and veil as she walked towards the altar. Ummi had dressed me in a flowery cotton dress with lace collar and puffy sleeves, with my hair in two little plaits on either side of my head. I used to love my pigtails. I remember how ornate the inside of the church was and how terrible the lady playing the organ was. Granted, she was 80-something years old, but still. After the ceremony, Malcolm and Mary came to our Haveli to get Ummi's blessings before they went on their holiday together. Have a blessed marriage. May you have a long life of happiness together. Ummi hugged Mary and patted Malcolm on the head as they left. Mary was carrying a box of homemade food for the journey Ummi had just prepared and insisted they take to make their journey more comfortable. I will see you very soon, Amma. Malcolm, too, used to call my Ummi his Amma. Thank you for the food, he waved as they sat in a danga, a horse and carriage taxi, to take them to the train station. Ummi couldn't see after an accident which caused her to lose her sight, yet she was one of the most independent women I ever knew. Ummi used to organise accounts and finances of the household, and she used to ensure that all of her employed workers got first pick of the crop or harvest from the family farm. If anyone was to question the way she did things, her response was always the same. They do all the work, they sweat hard in the sun so that privileged wayloaders like us can eat. They get first pick, I remember her saying as she reclined on the jarpai crocheting a little vest for someone as a gift. Ummi also made sure the cooks and cleaners ate the same food we ate. This way, she ensured they were all well looked after and were being treated fairly and professionally. She kept no difference between basic humanitarian treatment of people under her employment. Ummi was very keen on parda, practicing the veil. Her thought on it was, well, why should anyone get to see me if I can't see them? She had a sense of humour, I guess, as well, but she never enforced veiling on the rest of the family. I recall as a child Appa used to wear the veil, but when she was married, she stopped. Ummi never questioned it once, although I had done so. As a little child back then, I asked, Ummi, Appa didn't have the veil on anymore, to which Ummi responded, well, that's her decision now, isn't it? Who am I to come between the decision an adult makes for themselves? followed by a, "Now get yourself to sleep. You take forever waking up for school in the mornings." Appa likes to remind me of that time even now. I'll never live it down. Then there's my Baji, second in line, known as the scholarly one of our household. Baji loved her university books, but she also used to love her fashion. She had to be the most up-to-date in fashion in the house. Baji was wandering around the house, still not fully ready, screaming for an iron so that she could press her newly tailored check-printed yellow and brown top to go with her brown flared trousers. Her hair in a tightly wound bun with a pencil stuck in it to hold in place, she still had her night top on and was running around the balcony that circled above the courtyard of the Haveli. Baji disturbed the flowers newly blossomed on the ancient tree that grew through the centre of the courtyard, overlooking the entire height of the Haveli, taking pink and white petals back inside towards her bedroom as she went. She checked her thick winged eyeliner on the hallway ornate mirror before continuing to rant at the closest domestic help to go and get her an iron. "Vara evi vajgene! It's noon already!" she screamed, hurrying back to her room in her sandals. Amna, my third eldest sister, having heard Baji complaining at the bottom of the courtyard, walked towards Baji's room and tapped on the door. "Your iron," she stated, smiling, jovially shaking her auburn curls that made her ornate earrings swing with a slight jingle. She wore an emerald green gharara with a dull gold tapka work dupatta, which she tied across her torso, knotted at the hip to keep it out of her way. Her deep green glass bangles jingled as she tightened the knot, making her way back down to the courtyard. Amna, who must have only been a few years younger than Baji, but I always called her Amna, had been up since dawn. Ammi and Abbi used to describe her as sugar, or proficient in household work. It almost used to come naturally to her. Amna was usually the first one awake, after Ammi was, and it was as if her internal clock wouldn't let her wake up slowly. If she was up, she was going about the house doing some chore or another of the household. She'd given up a lot, mainly her studies, when Abbe was no longer the way he used to be. You see, Abbe was a political speaker, when he used to work, that is. He was always the main speaker at rallies and would spend many hours writing speeches and talking at mass congregations around the country. He was fluent in at least 6 languages that I knew of: Urdu, Punjabi, Hindi, Arabic, Farsi, and English. He was a very learned man and was an active member of the political goings-on. I recall him preparing for his regular speeches in which he'd address thousands of people. He'd wear his traditional suit of a crisp white shalwar with a rich black sherwani, finished with his multani chappals and topi. During winter, he'd drape a woolen shawl, often gifted to him by Ammi, to keep warm. He always used to bring me my favourite mithai, or sweets, upon his return. If on some occasion he were to forget, I'd go running towards him expecting to receive a box, only for him to realise he'd forgotten to bring me a very important box of mithai. It didn't matter what time it was, he would turn right back around and go to bring me some mithai. I was his favourite. So much so that he'd often do my homework for me when I didn't feel like doing it. "You're going to spoil her, Abbe," Baji would often warn. "She's already very careless as it is." "Chal rain de," Abbe would respond softly. "My bachcha is tired from playing all day." I would stand behind him, my arms wrapped around his neck, tongue pointed firmly out at Baji. "Which reminds me, will some kind soul in this house bring an old man a cup of hot tea?" It was 4 p.m. and he was accustomed to having a cup of tea to relax at the end of his day. Amna was always ahead of him. "Already here, Abbe." She'd place the cup of steaming chai on a weaved pink and green patterned coaster in front of him. Abbe would place a hand on Amna's head. "John dire, live long, my child," he'd respond, proud at how well she knew him. One afternoon, Abbe had left for one of his congregational speeches, but hadn't returned as he always had. We were informed that there had been an accident on his return journey in which he had sustained a terrible head injury. He had been in hospital for a while, but was cleared to come home with a warning from the doctors that he may not recall as much as he had done previously. We had been advised to provide him with 24-hour care, but Ammi by that time had already passed away. Appa was married and had her own home. Baji had her university, as did my brothers who had taken compassionate leave from their prospective training, the Army, Navy and Air Force, to be at home to sort the situation out, and I was very young. The only person who stood up to the responsibility was Amna. Not only would she look after us when Appa wasn't home, which was most of the time, but she made sure Abbe was well looked after too. This unfortunately meant that she had to give up her studies, but she never felt upset at her decision. It has to be said that Amna was always the happiest one in the family, no matter what happened. She always had a slight smile on her face, and I, for one, admired her for it. Amna continued down the marble staircase that ran through the Haveli and returned to sorting the jars of multiple pickled vegetables that had been fermenting for the last few days. "Has anyone seen Abira?" she asked the group of domestic help who were placing the jars in various boxes to be sent to a number of our neighbours' houses. "Nay, BBG," they declined, "but Choti Bibi did go out yesterday and bought a number of kites." "Aho," Appa laughed. "She's going to be running across the roof somewhere." She giggled, shaking her head as if to say, what else would she be doing? "Pull the string! Cage, 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 yard!" I shouted at Bablu. I waved in the direction I meant to save our kite, which was flying high in the morning sky. The sun wasn't as high yet, so it was a comfortable, warm climate to be on the vast expanse of the roof of the Haveli. Muniba was wrapping reams and reams of kite string around the wooden winder in her arm, crisscrossing the string across the length of the winder, her arm hooking the handles at the elbows. Bablu pulled the string, keeping the kite afloat far in the sky. Muniba, my school friend, and Bablu, it was a nickname we had for him, his real name was Bashir, and I were orchestrating our plan of attack on the kite we had been sparring with for the last few hours. We'd already lost 2 kites to the kids from the next street, and we weren't about to lose another. I was already dressed in a bright yellow shalwar kameez with baby blue piping around the collar and 3/4 length sleeve cuffs accessorized with a blue and yellow dupatta that had kitten lining the border, which I had gathered at the neck to fall over my back to keep out of my way. I had woken up especially early, since we had planned to spar with the rivals across the neighbourhood a few nights ago. I had placed all my clothes in order and made sure my new sparkly kusse were placed ready for me to throw on. That way, nobody could complain I was being slow or lazy, as I was usually accused of being, and I could spend maximum time flying kites. I was watching the other kite, trying to stay a few steps ahead of their next potential attack. We swung our kite away from theirs and they would pursue it, twisting the string to entangle it. "Oof, it's another goner," Bablu exasperated. "Another kite Zaya, wasted. Our kite was cut." We dropped silent and the kids from the other street were celebrating. We could hear their cheers as their tolvala played faster. Sometimes people would be so excited about Basant they'd hire musicians, namely tolvalas, to play at their houses. Bablu looked at Maniba, whose eyes were open wide and was chewing her bottom lip. They both knew what was coming as they exchanged a knowing glance. Bablu held back a laugh and Muniba flicked her hand, as was the custom then, which was a sign to say, "Off she goes." Running the length of the roof, I shout at the kids across the street stood on their roof. They had gone too far and had lined their kite strings with powdered glass. This made the string sharper and was a well-known cheating method used by kite flying fans who aimed to win at any cost. "Abe, you cheating little gade!" I screamed at the top of my voice. Various Auntie Gs and Marcy Gs who were up on the roofs looked at me disapprovingly as if to say, "This is no way for a lady to behave." I didn't care. I'd lost 3 kites now, and it was because the other side were cheating. I was absolutely livid. "Gade!" It means donkey. "I should have known than to trust someone like you. You never play fair." My hands were on my hips. My blue and yellow glace durian jingled down my wrist as I theatrically dramatized the entire situation. My long plait swung behind my right shoulder as I swept it back. I had no patience for my hair right now. My mirrored hair tie, branda, followed the circumference of the back of my waist, swung round and hit the left side of my leg, reflecting the sunlight as it went. I could see Abhay and his friends laughing away, holding onto their stomachs as if to tell me it was the funniest thing they'd seen in years. This used to rile me up quite a lot back then. "Just you wait," I gestured behind to my friends to come with me. "I'm coming to get my kites back." The 3 of us headed towards the staircase leading down from the roof of the Haveli. We had to be very quiet and careful as to not let one of the domestic help see us as we went. Little telltales that they were. They'd let our ba know we were going out, and I didn't want to get caught up in some domestic chore that was probably being assigned to me without my knowledge. Thankfully, the stairs leading from the roof ran the back of the Haveli, away from the courtyard and towards the front lawn. Brightly coloured flags had been draped from the Haveli walls to the perimeter of the walls that encased our home in celebration of Basant. I remember these walls being very high and were whitewashed annually or on the eve of an important occasion. Our front lawn was huge, bursting with various exotic plants and flowers and multiple fruit trees. In the summer, we were inundated with various fruit like oranges, grapefruit, mangoes and guavas, and also berries called falsa and jamun, such that you could smell the perfume of the fruit all around the garden. We'd get so much fruit that often Amna would make jams, pickles and chutneys with them to store in our pantry or gift them away. All the trees had blossomed gorgeously already, and you could tell this summer would be a great one for fruit this year. The trees also helped us to cross the length of the lawn without being seen. We finally made it to the large gate of the Haveli. I could hear someone calling out to me from inside the courtyard. Abira! Elongating the last syllable of my name. I froze for a second and then rushed to open the latch of the side gate. Jaldi, quick, let's just get out. It's not as if we'll be staying there very long. I gestured to Maniba and Bablu, letting them go out first as I jumped and twirled around to close the latch of the gate behind me. Being so brightly dressed today, it would have been very hard to miss us, but because the entire neighbourhood was so brightly dressed too, we blended in seamlessly.